In this video, we're going to talk about getting started with Claude Chat. If you open up the interface, one thing that you can do is just start chatting right away. You can start a conversation here on the main part of your screen. If you are in one conversation and then you want to start a new one, you can choose New Chat in the sidebar on the left. Then on the sidebar, you also have projects, which are basically, I like to think of them as folders. So it's a way of organizing your chats. And we'll go into more detail about that in a later lesson. Later lessons will also cover artifacts and customization options. So, there's more to say separately on those two things. Then you can also pin chats in the sidebar on the left. So if there are certain ones that you're using every day and you just want to find them very easily, you can pin them. I'll be explaining how to do that later. And then recents, this is going to show when you expand it, your full chat history. So you can see every single conversation you've had with Claude, regardless of whether that conversation is like a standalone conversation or in a project, you would be able to see it under recents. Now, when you are chatting with Claude, one thing I want to point out is you can click the plus sign in the lower left corner of the chat box. And this is where you can add files or photos to the chat. So if there's some kind of document or image that you want Claude to be able to reference as you're chatting, you can select that here. And then also if you start a chat and then decide that you want to add it to a project, you can click add to project, and Claude is going to show you all of the projects that you have already created, and you can move the chat from a standalone chat to a chat that's inside a project. I'm going to be going over these other things later, so we'll come back to them. But the last thing that I want to point out on this screen is that this chat box is where you can see what Claude model you are using. The default model is called Sonnet 4.6 at the time of this recording. So the reason that this is the default is because it's the fastest and the easiest on your usage. So for those reasons, it's the best one to use for your daily work. Then you do have the option of switching to Opus 4.7, which is the more powerful Claude model. You would use it here and there for more complex strategy, anything that requires deeper thinking, more important content. But because it's more powerful, it also is heavier, it has heavier usage. So I would use it more sparingly. So the good rule of thumb is Sonnet for everyday tasks, and then Opus here and there where it really matters. The other thing that I want to cover in this video are your settings. The way that you access settings in Claude is by clicking on in the lower left corner of your screen and then selecting settings. So we have some general settings, which I'm going to talk about in a second. Then account, this is basically if you either want to log out or delete your account. Then there are some privacy settings you can go through. You can review or make changes to your billing. Usage, this is helpful to look at. So this is where you can see where you stand in terms of your monthly usage limits. And you also have the option to purchase additional usage that would kick in after you reach your usage limits. If you don't have extra usage purchased, then you have to wait a certain amount of time before the new usage amount kicks in. But if you don't want to have to wait, you can purchase additional usage that is kind of on reserve. Then we have capabilities and connectors, which I'm going to be talking about in later lessons. So let's go over the general tab of the settings. This is where you can put in your name and you can tell Claude what to call you. You can select your industry or what best describes your work. Then you can give Claude some instructions, which I'm going to come back to in a second. You can change the appearance, like if you prefer light mode or dark mode. If you care about the font, you can change it here. You can select your language as well. So for the instructions, this is not anything that's too detailed, but it is a broad overview of who you are and the business that you're running, that where anything that you put in here, Claude will keep it in mind across all chats. Because remember, these are your account settings. So this applies to everything in your Claude account. So I wouldn't put anything too specific in here about like one specific project you're working on or something like that, but you can put more broad instructions here. And I've included an outline of things that I would recommend covering in your instructions. So the first is 1 or 2 sentences about who you are and what you do. Then describe your audience. Again, just 1 or 2 sentences about who you serve, what they need help with, what their key challenges and pain points are, and what kind of results they're seeking. Then your tone and your style preferences. I like to have a more conversational tone when I'm writing anything using AI. So you could put like a brief description of your tone and style preferences there. Also, if you have any particular formatting preferences, so some people like longer form content. Other people like more short and concise. Some people like bullets. Some people like headings. Some people like emojis. So if you have any particular preferences that you want applied across everything, you can put it there. And then finally, things to avoid. So if there are certain words or phrases or formatting things that you don't want Claude to do or say, you can put them here. Now, remember, this isn't a general overview. If you want to go give Claude deeper instructions on something like tone and style preferences, what I recommend is creating what's called a Claude skill that covers your more details and examples of your brand voice and style. And we're going to be covering skills later on in this course. So just watch that lesson if you want to learn more about creating a skill to give Claude more detailed instructions on your brand, tone, and style.